We're doing the rich tasks and the conversations and the discussion and all of that. And so then these kids who are absent, I've always struggled with, how do you help give them that information without it becoming that direct instruction? The one example that always sticks out to me.
Today we speak with Adrianne Burns, a middle school math coach and interventionist from Wisconsin. During our chat with Adrianne, we discuss a challenge that is on her mind right now, and we're sure it's on yours too. What issue are we talking about? Well, that huge issue of student absenteeism and what we can do to help students who've missed that problem-based lesson that sparked curiosity and fueled the sense-making in the rest of your students.
This is another Math Mentoring Moment episode where we talk with a member of the Math Moment Maker community who is working through struggles, and together we brainstorm possible next steps and strategies to overcome them.
Let's hit it! Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce from tapintoteenminds.com.
And I'm John Orr from mrorr-isageek.com. We are two math teachers who together,
with you, the community of math moment makers worldwide who want to build and deliver math lessons that spark curiosity,
fuel sense-making,
and ignite your teacher moves. John, let's get ready for another jam-packed episode. But first, let's take a moment to say thank you to all of you math moment makers from around the globe who have taken time to share their feedback and their love by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, this week we want to highlight Lenny Vermas. Lenny, I've met from Nebraska, who has also left us a 5-star rating and review.
And actually, Lenny was one of our winners. We had a 5-book giveaway, Building Thinking Classrooms, for entering into the draw by sharing his 5-star review on Twitter. Lenny said, Math PD to build curiosity. I would recommend Making Math Moments That Matter for any teacher that want to help students enjoy learning math. Each week provides strategies to engage students. MMM was my first podcast, and it was about a year ago, and now I'm hooked. Can't wait for new episodes each week. I've been able to listen as teachers and math leaders share their strategies with the world.
Wow. Can't thank Letty enough for taking the time out of his day to not only listen, but to help us increase the number of ratings to over 300 from around the globe, and actually over 100 reviews.
Fantastic. If you haven't taken a moment to go and give us an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we would certainly appreciate it. And make sure to share it to social media with the hashtag MMMgiveaway, because we often do review giveaways, and every single one of them will be entered into our next draw.
All right, now let's get into our discussion with Adrianne.
Hey there, Adrianne. Thanks for joining us here on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. We're super excited to have you on. We've been in contact on Twitter for so long. You're now a member of the Making Math Moments, or a Math Moment Maker community, which is great. We love connecting with folks that we're kind of, I guess, looking over your shoulder. How are you doing today? And how's your world given the current fall situation where a lot of people are in hybrid models, distance models? How are things going in your world?
It's going okay. We're plugging along, trying to figure out the school year this year. I am in the Math Maker Academy because of the distance learning resources you have in there. Has been just very helpful trying to process how the school year is even going to look for us, and having kind of those resources and conversations in there have been very beneficial, since we are navigating in uncharted territory. My school doing the blended learning, is not anything any of us have ever really done before. Even in the spring, we were all virtual. So trying to figure out how to balance those two components. It's nice to kind of have those resources and that community to be able to problem solve with.
In this time, Kyle and I, just like you and everyone else, we were working in kind of lockdown mode or total virtual mode back in the springtime. But as we kind of get started up, we're adding more resources because I'm back in the classroom. Kyle's kind of doing a blended thing. So we've got lots of discussion points to talk about in our academy. Adrianne, let's learn a little bit more about yourself. Where are you coming from? Tell our listeners about that. How long have you been teaching? And maybe give us a little backstory on your teaching journey.
Yeah, so I'm in Wisconsin near Green Bay by the Packers is usually the reference point most people know. And I am in a middle school. I'm a math coach and interventionist, and I have been teaching for over 20 years at this point, and I've kind of flowed between things. When I was first in school, I wanted to teach elementary school. I wanted second grade was my ideal, and I had my middle school certification as well. And after I student taught in a middle school and I did a long-term sub in a middle school, I just started working in middle schools and absolutely love it and can't even imagine trying to teach second grade at this point.
Me too.
So I taught math for 6 years, and then I actually got my master's in educational technology and moved to my current district as the computer literacy teacher is what the class was called at the time. Now it's digital literacy as technology takes off and there's so much more for kids to know. I did that for about 8 years, and then we restructured our schedule to more of a block schedule. After the Common Core came out, we just needed more class time for math, and so they kind of rearranged the schedule and had to shuffle staff around. So I, at that point, shifted back to math. And in my hiatus, while I was teaching computer literacy, is when the Common Core came out. And so when I was back in the math classroom, it was very different than the math classroom I had left. And that was, I think, Kyle, when I started following you, my friend had kind of got me on Twitter, and you were doing all of your blogs and your 3-act tasks. And there was a lot with like the proportional reasoning and all of those things that I was trying to learn about middle school math. And I did a year in 8th grade math and then moved to 7th grade math. So most of my recent classroom experiences have been in 7th grade math. And then I did a professional development with U.S. Math Recovery, which is basically professional development on the research of children's development and the mathematical reasoning. They were training our middle school and high school teachers, so we had a better foundation of kind of where the kids were coming from. And when there were kids who struggled in the middle school, how we could better support them. And I just could not get enough of it. And I spent a few years really just trying to learn as much as I could about elementary math, because again, that was all the whole conceptual understanding and all of that was very different for me. And through that, when my school created a math interventionist and coach position, I kind of jumped at the chance to do that because just to spend more time really digging into struggles students have and how we can better support them in middle school and how we can build those foundational skills. So the past 3 years, that's what I've been doing is the interventionist piece and then the coaching piece. And it was funny because with the coaching piece, my administrator said she loved what I'd been doing in the classroom and wanted me to be able to support teachers and help them do that in their classrooms. And I was doing at the time a lot of like the rich tasks and 3-act math and all the curiosity and the stuff that had been on your site, Kyle. And the way I was doing that in my classroom, much like you guys have talked about, is you try something and you fail forward and you change it and fix it and fail forward. And so then I was in this coaching role trying to think, okay, well, I can't really have the teachers do that because I'm supposed to be more knowledgeable. And that was actually when you guys started doing the Make Math Moment stuff together. So it was really perfect timing for me that you guys started doing that because you had all of those frameworks and all of the stuff I was trying to figure out, you have kind of laid out there for teachers. So I guess I've kind of been riding on your coattails for quite a few years.
Well, listening to that backstory, and I'm hearing so many things, like especially now, think of how relevant that is. So you had gone into and taught in the information technology sort of space, we'll call it, right? tech integration or whatever the title was you were doing for so long. And obviously, I'm sure that is helping quite a bit now as we've done a lot of online learning recently and now a lot of hybrid models going on. But then also to kind of have the opportunity to be sort of teaching math at so many different grade levels is probably such a blessing now that you're in this math coach and interventionist role. You've had an opportunity to kind of dab in different things through Twitter and the math Twitter blogosphere, and whether that's 3-Act Math and all these wonderful tools and tasks that are out there. And now, how cool is it that we get to chat with you about all of those things? So before we go any deeper today on this Math Mentoring Moment episode, we've got to know, what would be your math moment? When we say math class, what pops into your mind, given this, your career has spanned all kinds of math, but let's go way back to when you were a student. What moment pops into your mind when we say math class?
Yeah. So every time I listen to your podcast and my brain kind of wanders always to the same memory. When I was in middle school, well, technically it was junior high. So it was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And so in 7th grade, they wanted to move me into 8th grade math. And my mom didn't want me skipping a year, so we didn't do that. And then in 8th grade, they again wanted me to skip and go into, it would have been algebra, or was that pre-algebra at that point, I guess. And my mom agreed. So I was in this advanced math class. And I was only in it for a quarter, because at the end of the quarter, I had a B, which of course, oh goodness, and I was feeling very lost and confused. So I switched back to the regular grade level math class and actually ended up working independently at my own pace, kind of just in the back of the room. And I made it through that math book and then started in the pre-algebra book. And every time I think back on that, I think about like the work of Joe Bowler and the mindset, and wondering if someone had, I guess, helped me, like, did I just give up and think I can't do this? And I didn't really have to work hard at math before and wasn't used to that. And did I just need someone encouraging me? But then I've also, sometimes when I reflect, think about the middle schoolers that I work with and how often we tend to put pressure on these kids, and we push for them to, do all of these things. And my principal and I talked about it at one time, like sometimes you just need a win, and it's okay to be good at something. And oftentimes we think when you're good at something, now, how can I get better? Where's the next step? And there's a difference between growth and, I think, sometimes in our culture, how we push too far, which I think we see in some of Joe Bowler's research in terms of acceleration and all of that.
Yeah, never good enough, right, is sort of the thought sometimes, or maybe the message that might be received.
Yeah. My mom has said she's surprised that I became a math teacher because of my experiences in math, but I actually really liked just working at my own pace in the back of the room, because I am one who tends to need a little more time to think and process. And I think I was always in my head trying to figure out those conceptual pieces. When I first started teaching math, I just thought, I'm a visual learner, so I teach this to my students in a visual way. And then when I got back into math and we, with the Common Core, started getting into that deeper understanding, it was like, well, this is what I've been doing and trying to figure out and trying to explain to kids. And so for me, it's one of those things, like sometimes I've looked back at it like feeling bad about that experience, but now every time I reflect, I start to feel better. Like that was exactly where I wanted to be and needed to be and helped me get where I am.
When we reflect on past experiences, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's thinking about like, I wish I had maybe had a better experience, but then that you got the experience that got you where you are now. Like it would be could be a whole different world. Like if you think of the butterfly effect, that every little thing can affect you to go on to the next path. And also to kind of like build on your idea, or just to think about the way you presented that idea that we push and push and push, but maybe we don't need to push all the time. It just reminded me of this thing called the Peter Principle, which is like, it's more like a business principle in the sense that people rise to their level of incompetence. So if we take it out of the context of school for a moment, that if you're in a business, if you're really good at sales, what happens? You get promoted. And when you get promoted, you go on to being a manager. But oftentimes really great great salespeople are really terrible managers. And so then all of a sudden you get to this level in your business where you are not performing at optimal level anymore. You actually were doing really well below that, and you should have stayed there to keep doing well. But you got to this point where you're not so great. But no one ever goes down in business, right? Like it's in a level. So it's like you stay there, and then it's just all of a sudden this competence level. So there's this like weird phenomenon.
Or in education, right?
Yeah.
Like going, let's say from teacher to department chair
Right.
to
That can also happen.
Vice principal or whatever. It's very rare where people start going the opposite way because they sort of feel like, well, I don't want to seem like I failed at that
Exactly.
or that I'm not good at that.
Once
right?
you get to be a vice principal, you might have been a great teacher, but not so great vice principal. You're right, Kyle. No one's going to admit that. But thinking about students, sometimes that's a weird thought to have too, because you want to push kids to strengthen and go to the next level and always kind of maximize your potential is something we always say, right? And try to push kids to do. But Adrianne, I think you're right. That's like, there's all of this, like, let's give kids wins. Like, let's make them feel confident where they are. I don't know. I just had that thought. Then it was a kind of a double-edged sword too, for sure. Let's switch gears here a little bit. Let's talk about your current role. Would you be able to share with us a recent success?
Yeah. I've been trying to focus on my successes at the end of each day because otherwise it feels very stressful right now. So I have some small intervention groups that I work with. And this year, I decided most of my interventions that I do are not grade level interventions. We're not working on grade level material. It usually focuses around multiplicative reasoning, fractional reasoning. Those are the things, some of those foundational things. There are some students who sometimes still are just using counting strategies. So even just trying to get some of that additive thinking. And so what I decided to do this year is I started all of my groups the same so I could kind of informally assess and see, how they think about things. And I decided to use Cuisinart rods because they are my absolute new favorite. And I've learned a lot from Simon Gregg and Mark Chubb and all of their different posts. And so we really just started by doing some activities with the rods and building different numbers. And I was a little worried at first that the kids might think, because they know they struggle in math. They know that's why they're coming to me. And you pull out the rods and you're like, oh, which one is the number 5? And then how many ways can we build 5? And it sounds like such an elementary thing to do. But as we were doing it, they start noticing patterns and we think about how many combinations were there to make 3 and how many to make 4 and how many to make 5. And they start to notice these patterns. And just in case someone wants to play around with this, you actually get a different pattern. I let the kids decide if 4 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 4 or not, because in the rods, does the order of the rods matter? And these different patterns started to emerge. And it was just so much fun to watch these kids think and the way they worked through it and noticing the patterns. And something that I thought was going to feel very elementary just was so rich and so deep. And so I'm just really excited about the work I'm doing with those kids. That's been my win, is that's been going really well.
Fantastic. And the part that makes it difficult, especially in, let's say, your role where students are coming to see you and maybe it might be in the back of the class or it might be in a small group to the side, or maybe they actually have to leave the room to go for spending some time with you as the interventional teacher. But the part that I think is so important as well is for hopefully some of the classroom teachers are also using these concrete manipulatives, not just for students who are struggling, because they are so powerful, just like you've alluded to here, that when you get working with some of these concrete and visual representations, these math models that we're using, students are able to use their reasoning skills. And that's something that is so easy to leave on the table. Like when we talk about sense making here on the podcast, finding ways to allow students to make sense of mathematics. It can be done with symbols, but oftentimes some of the most richest conversations happen when we're using some of those concrete and those visual models, be it a number line or a bar model or whatever it might be that you're drawing out. So thanks for mentioning both Simon Gregg and Mark Chubb. We're definitely going to link up some of those resources. Mark actually isn't too far up the road from John and I, a couple hours up the 401 here in Ontario. He's in the Niagara region and is a great resource. Simon, I'm not too sure where Simon's from, but
I think
love
he's
his
in
work.
France.
Yes, definitely a little further than Mark is from John and I, but awesome. So thanks for sharing those. Now, with this Math Mentoring Moment episode, typically we bring on guests to come on and kind of riff on things with the guests so that the three of us can kind of put our brains together and try to overcome a challenge. So what we want to know from you is, what's on your mind lately? What could we riff on together? Any struggles or challenges that we might be able to dig into here?
Yeah. So it's been something that I've been trying to figure out for a while, but it always kind of went to the back burner. But now, especially with our current situation, and we have a lot of kids who are being quarantined, whether it's waiting for test results or because of contact with someone, and they end up being out of school for almost 2 weeks. And with our blended, we have the face-to-face time and the virtual. So the virtual days aren't an issue for those kids who are quarantined, but we're trying to make the most out of our face-to-face times, and we're doing the rich tasks and the conversations and the discussion and all of that. And so then these kids who are absent, I've always struggled with, how do you help give them that information without it becoming that direct instruction? The one example that always sticks out to me, because it's a task I love so much, is with compound interest. And there's a Robert Kaplinski task with Futurama, where, if you're not familiar with Futurama.
Oh, yes. I have used that.
Yeah. So Fry is cryogenically frozen for 2,000 years, and he goes to the bank with his debit card that had, I forget, like 97 cents or some odd cents on it, and at whatever percent interest after 2,000 years, and you have the kids try to figure out how much that is, but they only know simple interest because they learn simple interest in 7th grade, and 8th grade gets into compound interest. And so it's this wonderful task where you just first kind of let the kids stumble through with the simple interest. And they obviously realize that when you have to calculate year after year for 2,000 years, they're not going to be able to do that. And they get to start to look at the patterns and generalize that formula, so that by the end of it, you have the compound interest formula, but they have such a deeper understanding of all the parts of that and why they're there. And then a student who's absent, it's like, oh, we had this great discussion. Here's the compound interest formula. Like, I don't know how to recreate that understanding for them after the fact for students who missed it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think we all go through. And no matter how we present our material, is a struggle of absenteeism. And what do we do? How do we help kids the most when they come back? How do we help them be there? There's a lot of complexities around that. And I think we could definitely chat about that. But I think we all had been in that situation where a kid is away, missed a great activity, but now what do I do? Like, do I just hand them the booklet and say, catch up? Or do I restructure class? Like, there's a lot of questions that we could go, but which one is optimal? Which one's best for everybody or best for that student? How do we manage all that? But before we keep going on that, Adrianne, what have you done so far? Like, in that situation in your class, what had you done, or what have you seen done with the teachers that you work with? That too. I guess we'll start there.
Yeah, well, I've tried like showing student samples, or a sample of, like, I sometimes take pictures of the work that we do in class, and then we can refer back to it later and kind of show. So kind of like the idea of, in a number talk, someone's explaining their thinking. And so being able to do something like that with it, where I have, here's some of the work we did, but then I'm still just kind of explaining to them the work we did, and it doesn't always connect with them or resonate with them, really what that is. And so I've been thinking about, especially now that we're creating some of these virtual lessons too, like, there's so many possible ways to deliver some of this content virtually. But then I also wonder, like, again, we have an 80-minute math block at my school. So am I really going to expect a student who was absent to be doing an 80-minute type lesson to make up for it? So trying to think of if there's a way to modify or condense somehow.
Yeah. And that was going to be, I guess, my next wonder was sort of like, what does that look like or sound like now? And you've painted us a bit of that picture, right? You had mentioned you give them the quick summary, and at the end, it's sort of like, and look at what happened. Boom, this thing popped out. I wonder, when we do that, I wonder if it's like we're hoping that it's like the student was there, but we know they weren't there. So I wonder, are there any thoughts on how might you be able to recreate maybe a mini experience of that? And when I say that, you used Fry's Bank, that Dan Meyer problem, which great task. John's used it, I've used it, and we'll include that link in the show notes. I wonder if we need to have that opportunity to be as curious for that particular student. If there's a way that we might be able to give them a question to chew on that might be different, but might still help them arrive at a similar place. Do you have any thought? Is that ringing any bells for you or giving you any thoughts? Or maybe I need to be more clear on what we're riffing on here.
No, and that makes sense. And it gets me thinking about even just like the structure or routine of what the student does after they're absent. So typically they have study hall time, and that's when they would come to me and I would, kind of go over what they missed. And usually they do that once, right? They come, we talk about what they missed, and then they can go on their merry way. But maybe structuring it more like they come to me and I can give them some sort of, why don't you take this? And whether it's a notice and wonder or think about this question and what do you think about that, and have them take that with them and come back a second time, then they have something invested in it and have given it some thought. So then when we have that conversation, they're more engaged and involved in it.
I'm wondering about, say, what a classroom or a normal kind of progression of lessons for you look like right now. Maybe paint us a picture. Like, is this lesson 1 on, if we're talking compound interest, you did some simple interest before, we're going to do some compound interest. We're going to do some switching up the terms and the interest rates and see the effects of all of that. Like, are you progressing from one topic to the next in that, say, unit and then moving on to another unit? Or are you doing something different, say, progression-wise in your lessons?
The way our curriculum resource is set up is there's quite a bit of spiraling through. So each chapter has 2, maybe 3 sections. So it starts with one topic and then it kind of switches to another. And then that topic that we had in the first section, we might finish up in a different chapter, if that makes sense, to kind of give them time to practice some of those things, and then we revisit it. So it kind of is like that spiraled curriculum. So the compound interest one, I don't think with 8th grade math it doesn't really get revisited because they don't do much with. At that point, we're just looking at, can you tell the difference between linear and exponential growth? The exponential growth is really more in the algebra curriculum, and 8th grade is mostly the linear. So that piece is more like, I guess, the end of that whole conversation, if that makes sense.
Right. And you mentioned how the curriculum has sort of like a spiraling effect going on. And those who have been listening to the podcast for quite some time know that John and I tend to really advocate for some of the benefits of spiraling, not unintentional spiraling, of course. Like, we do want to keep common ideas together and do it in a synced way. But one of the benefits as well is that over time, if a student is absent quite a bit, it gives this opportunity for them to fall back into place without too much, we'll call it, missed time. So there's definitely a beauty there when we're using problem-based lessons and spiraling that can help us work on some chunks because we're going to come back to them at a later date as well. So typically when we spiral, we try not to do a one and done sort of experience where we do this big unit and then boom, it's gone. So if a student's away for a week, they've sort of almost lost half the unit or whatever it might be. So there's huge benefit there. But it sounds to me like you're wondering, what about that individual lesson? So if we go back to Fry's Bank and we think about that particular lesson about compound interest, how do we help that student when they show back up? And I wonder, might there be a condensed version of that question where there's no video, there's no notice and wonder? Because again, that was an 80-minute period that student missed. That's an 80-minute moment that student missed, right? So we're not going to be able to recreate it in the same way. But I wonder, is there a way, and I'm going to throw it back to you here, Adrianne, is there a way that we can kind of frame a question for that student to think on, whether it's in study hall, as you mentioned, or even if it's just at the beginning of class, to give that student an opportunity to kind of reason through something and allow them to kind of be put in a position where there's a little bit of reasoning going on and then maybe some connecting that can happen near the end.
It's a lot to think about. But no, I mean, you're right. Like if you look at it and maybe just start by looking at what really was the problem posed without necessarily the video and the notice and wonder, or even with something like the compound interest in the lesson or in the activity, the kids are working their way to the formula, but we could also work that in reverse, right? Like give them, here's the formula you're going to need, but let's kind of unpack it and looking at the different parts and trying to maybe understand the structure of it.
And if we think about this as a whole, there's some teachers listening right now going, those kids missed, and we want them to be there as much as possible. This is why we try to make math moments that matter in our classes. We try to create these lessons so that kids are curious, but it fuels their sense making and it should stick with them longer. When they're there, we create those moments. And if they miss a day, it's like Kyle said, that moment is kind of gone. But if you do this on a regular basis, it's not like just a one and done thing. Then when the kid is missed, they're like, I missed that great moment. I have found when teaching this way, especially with problem-based lessons on a regular basis in my class that generate curiosity, I've had better attendance. So it's almost like this preventative measure that we can get kids who's like, I'm not going to skip 9th grade math class or 8th grade math class. I'm going to make sure I try to go. And math class is actually the class that makes me feel great about school versus maybe some of the other experiences they've had in the past. And sometimes when we think about this, that teachers are listening going, well, if they missed, am I going to reteach it at lunchtime? I don't have time for that. I've got to do this marking. I've got to do tracking for COVID now. And I've got so many other things on my plate. And so it's like, well, what can I really do? And I often think about if I was teaching the way I taught for the first 10 years, which is very traditional, which is exactly what you kind of described in the sense that if a kid missed, I would hand them the formula and say, here's an example, copy it down. That's what I used to do every single day. And that was what my math class looks like. And that's what math class looks like, I still think, for a lot of kids in our country and North America and across the world. And so when a kid misses and we do that, because some of us are like, I can't spend more time trying to like recreate that moment because it's gone. And so handing them that formula saying, this was this great moment with Fry and we talked about this, here's the outcome of where we went. Kyle mentioned like maybe this condensed version, but then was like, today we're going to do another great thing that's going to create a moment, and it's building on the moment we did yesterday. So I tend to think that they missed it, but you're not hurting them any worse than I used to. It's almost like I can't recreate it, but I'm still going to help them by giving them the condensed version.
And something else that I was thinking there is just this shift from when we're typically sharing, we're constantly talking about how we want to spark curiosity. And of course, we want to keep doing that with our students and with that whole group. But when we're in this, like, we'll call it like a triage moment. And there's nothing worse than like you come in to school and you're ready to go for like another great lesson, or at least in your mind, you're hoping is going to turn out to be a great lesson. And then in walks the student who missed yesterday and you go, oh, it's like your stomach drops and you go, now what do I do? How do I help? And you had mentioned as well, and John's kind of referenced it as well, like for a really long time, we would have said, okay, like here's what we did, here's this handout, and get yourself caught up and we'll carry on. And I did that for many, many years. And that was back when I was still in that procedures first sort of mentality. So my wonder is, when this is happening, is there a way that we can sort of shift to deal with this triage moment where a student's walking in? Can we shift from the focus on curiosity for that particular student, for that particular moment, and really shift right to fueling sense making right off the bat, which means getting to the point with that student. And that really is going to require purposeful questioning. So if I think about the big idea with the compound interest in Fry's Bank, is this idea that, well, what does he need to know? Okay, well, he needs to know that I'm going to earn this much interest every single year based on the balance at the end of every year. So that's one thing they need to know. But then the second one is sort of like taking that context and basically giving them that problem and sending them off and saying, hey, I want you to just work on this problem. It could be written out in a Word problem. It could be like however you want. But basically, that's what we did. It's like a nice summary. It's almost like in my mind, I'm picturing taking a reflection question that you may have given the group the day before that this particular student had missed. Oftentimes when I give them a consolidation prompt, I'm thinking about, typically I restate the scenario, like what had happened, and then I tweak it a little bit to ask them to unpack it if I changed something. So you could essentially be giving them this consolidation prompt, having them work through it. And it's like they have missed the notice and wonder. They have missed this curious moment, the collaboration, all of the great things that are happening in the classroom, but they're still being given the opportunity to kind of reason through this problem so that some of those connections can be made. Because in all those years that I did hand over the formula, even if my intent was to like help them understand it later, it's almost kind of all for naught. There's a resource, and we'll put this in the show notes as well. The Adding It Up document is a book from the National Research Council. And basically, when you go through this, they talk in chapter 4 about the mathematical proficiencies, and they mention how the urge to understand conceptually after you've already been giving a set of procedures sort of decreases significantly. So you'll probably find that with a lot of students. Like once they already know an algorithm, it's much harder for us to sort of inspire them to want to know the why. It's like they just know the steps. They're like, I just want to put this into the machine, whether it's the algorithm or in the calculator, and I just want to pump these out until it's done, versus giving them this opportunity to kind of wrestle with an idea and be able to make some sense of it. So I guess I'm kind of throwing this idea out there to you. And I don't know if that seems reasonable or realistic, or maybe it seems unrealistic for you, but this idea of being able to kind of look at that lesson and almost like go for that big idea that you were after and being able to put it down in a couple sentences for that student to be able to sit down and wrestle with, and then be able to have that discussion with them. I want to flip it back to you. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Does that seem reasonable, or do you have a different idea that's popped into your mind as we're riffing here? Because we'd love to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, I like that idea. And like when I think about, so the example I gave is the one that sticks in my head. And I think it does because in that unit, like the ending point of it, do you know what I mean? It's not like, because we have other ones, if I think about in 7th grade when we work on percents, like we do a lot of days of different percents and building on it. And so, like you said, if a student is absent, it's different in that situation because the next day we're going to continue on that same concept, that same topic. So having them, you have to do it right away. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't, oh, come see me during study hall. Like they need what they missed now so they can participate in what we're doing in class, and thinking about how to really summarize that and just get 2 questions I would ask at the end to summarize to see if the students have that understanding, giving some of those right away so that that student is ready to kind of engage and listen and have that conversation of what we did yesterday so they're ready to participate for the day. Versus I think there are other tasks and activities and things where it's not as urgent that they need that right in this moment. And so then I think there might be more options in terms of how to address that and work with that student. But I like the idea of just getting to that fueling the sense making, because that's really what they need in order to, when I'm conversing with them. Because so often I feel like I'm explaining this to you and I can't really tell if it's making sense to you. And in the end, you just nod and go off and do the homework. So to kind of have some of those focused questions to get them thinking and leading that conversation with that.
Yeah. Something else that we recently, I guess in the last 6 months to a year, have been focusing on that I think could help here is having like a context that stretches across a unit. or across like a series of lessons that are all kind of tied to the same context. So like taking one idea, like Kyle's got on our makemathmoments.com/tasks website, which has a number of tasks in there. We've got like 5 or 6 day units. And one in particular I'm thinking about is we got one that's like making chocolate milk. We're looking at some proportional reasoning, but on day 1, you do this curious task. But on day 2, you're still in that same context. You're still talking about making chocolate milk, but you extend it into, say, the next lesson, and it builds on what you did before. And so it's like not a brand new feeling to the kids. It's kind of like, oh, we did this yesterday. Can anyone kind of recap what we did yesterday? What was the video like? What was our main lesson goal yesterday? Can you share that with the group? So it's really nice because then all of a sudden you can get into a math talk, and that's all built into the resources that are on the website. It's kind of laid out for us teachers to go through that unit. But even if you were thinking about a topic that one of our tasks isn't addressing on our website, I think extending context can also assist with, say, absenteeism, that it's not a brand new example that we've never seen before. It's like we're still in that realm, but we're just tweaking it a little bit.
Yeah. And I've noticed those in there. And I like that because I've always done, when I was in the classroom, I had my 3-act task and you got through all 3 acts and wrapped it up in a tidy little bow that day. Because there's always more like that you can dig deeper or you want to explore or it relates to this next thing that we're going to be teaching. And so I looked through, I don't remember which one I looked through, but it's very cool how it's set up. And it just kind of continues that it feels like it's really still that same, I don't want to say the same task because that sounds like that would be boring to do the same task for so many days. But like for kids to understand that context, you're not always having to start over with, okay, now let's understand this, and then we can get to the meat of it. And I think that would help then if they are absent because they are still in that flow and it's not totally foreign to them.
I'm picturing specifically like for so long I was trying to find/create curious tasks. And in my mind, it was like, if I could get a curious task for every single day of the school year, that was like my unreachable goal. But it was like something that I was loving if it was possible. Like I wanted to do that. And what I realize now is that by riding the coattails of those contexts, I don't have to focus so much on the curiosity because I already have them. It's like you're already invested in the trilogy of whatever your favorite movie is. John's amazing at these sci-fi movies that all have, 4 and 5 and 6 or whatever versions of them. But, you get the idea.
Do you want me to name some? Is that what you're looking for? Because Kyle's like, I don't know the names of these movies.
Yeah. So you've got Lord of the Rings. Like you don't have to spend as much time on the getting people into the storyline because they already know it and they're already like interested and they want to keep going further. So I'm kind of picturing with Fry's Bank, it's like, okay, I missed let's say the start of this we'll call it a mini unit. We don't want to give the impression that it's like this entire concept over 2 weeks or whatever. But let's say it's like 3 days, 4 days. You could, on day 2, where the student comes back to school, by keeping that context and maybe even replaying the video just to kind of like re-spark some of the memories they had from the day before, have a student restate what happened the previous day. Then maybe you could even introduce like Fry's brother or whoever, and it's a slightly different scenario, giving the students this opportunity to like do it again and get a little purposeful practice in there. But then where you keep the students, I find on day 2 or further with one context is by changing something. It's like you sort of like pull the rug on something that would be surprising. So in a perfect world, Fry's video would be a simple interest problem. And then on like day 2, it's like, I don't have to show any video. I could just tweak it and say, what if the interest was paid this way? Now things get really interesting. So I guess what we're saying is when students have missed some time, if there's a way for us to bring back yesterday's lesson, not because it's simply a recap. I used to do this all the time. I would recap the day before and it was like the kids were zombies, right? Like they didn't really want to rehear what we did yesterday. They just want to get on to what we're doing today. But if it's related to today, then they sort of know, like, it's like the storyline is continuing here. And Mr. Pierce or Mr. Orr is going to have, or Mrs. Burns is going to have this like interesting scenario that might just be them speaking it verbally. It might not be a video. It might not be even an image, but it's going to play on what we already know to be true. And then now something has changed. And when you think about all good storylines, that's sort of like what's happening, right? Like you're on this journey and then all of a sudden something goes wrong. And in math, there's so many opportunities for us to do that. So I wonder if that's in our mind about yesterday's lesson and saying like, so how am I going to take yesterday's lesson and just turn it into a dumpster fire, where by just changing the context just a little bit, and then all of a sudden we're now bumping into this new idea, this new place. And again, I was using the simple interest, compound interest sort of scenario where it's like all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I just turned that thing right upside down. And it doesn't require as much effort to get that curiosity going.
Yeah. Now I want to go back and start looking at some of our tasks to think about, because I like that, to think about that condensed version and what is really that sense making and what questions can we give those students to, like you say, to chew on so that they can start to dig deeper into that and get engaged, especially if it is something that is more than one day, to get them into that.
I'm wondering right now, Adrianne, as we kind of get close to our hour marker here, is we've chatted about a lot of kind of different ideas around helping address this absent issue, which is a big issue. And I don't know if we have any solid solutions here, but we did do some nice brainstorming, I think, and makes me want to redesign some of the things that I've implemented in my classroom. But what would you say out of this conversation is, you say, your biggest kind of takeaway? And how are you feeling after the call?
What I'm thinking about most right now is part of it is that I think it is going to depend on what activity or what lesson a student misses, because being able to kind of look at that spiral that our curriculum has, because there are some things where if a student misses, it's going to come back. And so is this the time to make sure they know it, or is it not really essential at this point and we're going to pick it up again later? And I think too about in problem strings, how problem strings help open up students' minds to a certain strategy by asking certain questions in a certain way, gets them thinking in that direction. If there's something similar to that, if I look at just that sense-making part and some focused questions, if I ask those questions in a certain way, is that going to help those kids maybe in a more condensed amount of time kind of get to that thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like lots to still think about here. And like you're saying, it's really going to depend, right? And we use that a lot, both in the podcast and our online courses in the academy. We always say it depends because there's so many things, so many moving parts. But the way you're thinking about it right now from sort of a high level, it's almost like you sort of have to analyze, like, where am I at? Are we coming back to this idea? Is it essential for like tomorrow's lesson or today's lesson? And then if it is, maybe that's where you look at it and say, okay, so how do I make these lessons more connected based on the content, or on the context, I should say. So clearly, if I need yesterday's lesson that the student missed for today's, and I'm worried about that for that student, then how can I make, we know the content's connected, how do I make the context more connected so that we can sort of make it feel like this is a student who's shown up a little late for the movie, but by participating and watching the movie unfold as we're kind of working through day two, they're sort of connecting the dots in the part of the movie that they missed. Now, obviously, I'm using an example of a movie. We don't want them sitting back. We want them participating. But by keeping that context together, that might be a way for them to sort of like get right back on track and almost start filling in the gaps through even just the conversations students are having in the room. So I'm super excited to hear how this goes. And I'm wondering, Adrianne, are you up for maybe checking in with us if we were to touch base maybe 9 to 12 months from now, just to see how things are progressing, see if maybe any of these ideas turned into something, or maybe you found another way to address this problem and maybe you'd be able to come back and share it with the Math Moment Maker community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll solve all the problems and then just come back and tell you about it.
Excellent. That's exactly what we're hoping for. This has been a great chat. We are looking forward to kind of touching base and kind of sharing some more ideas on this topic or another topic when we come back. So thanks so much for joining us this evening, and we wish you all the best in this school year and all the challenges that are coming our way.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much again to Adrianne for chatting with us. We look forward to her growth and speaking with her again in the near future.
Are you interested in joining us for an upcoming Math Mentoring Moment episode where you too can share a big math class struggle? Apply over at makemathmoments.com/mentor. That's makemathmoments.com/mentor.
In order to ensure you don't miss out on any new episodes as they come out each week, be sure to smash that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget about YouTube. We've been doing a ton of YouTube lives these days, so get on there, hit the subscribe button so that you're notified the next time we go live.
Show notes and links to resources from this episode and full transcripts that can be read from the web or download and take with you. Head on over to makemathmoments.com/episode 114. That's makemathmoments.com/episode 114.
Well, until next time, my Math Moment Maker friends, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And a high five for you.